Well, welcome to this week's Gospel study video. This week's Gospel picks up right where we left off last week. The Gospel from this week is from John chapter 15, verses 12 through 17, and this text continues the words of Jesus to his disciples as they gather on the last night of his life, picking up exactly where we left off last week. If you remember from last week's sermon and video, chapters 13 through 17 in John's Gospel, nearly 1/4 of the Gospel, takes place during the last few hours of Jesus' life when he's with his disciples just before he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was betrayed, arrested, and handed over to his enemies. In these chapters, Jesus talks to his disciples about being his. He comforted them in their fears and uncertainty. He prayed for them. And in today's gospel, he gives them a new commandment and he changes their relationship with him. Last week, we heard the first part of this chapter as Jesus talked about being the true vine. His heavenly Father was the vine grower who cared for the vine and pruned it, and his disciples were the branches which needed to be firmly attached to the true vine so that they would bear good fruit which would glorify the Father. Then, as today's gospel begins, Jesus gives them a new commandment, a commandment similar to the one he gave them a few minutes earlier during their time with him. There, in John chapter 13, verse 34, he told them, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." The love Jesus commands his disciples to have for one another is founded upon the love he has shown them during their time together. And now in this week's gospel, he says these words to them, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." It's almost exactly the same, but there is a difference. For now, with the next verse, Jesus will tell them what this kind of love for one another actually looks like. Love, as a general concept, can be vague and nebulous, nice thoughts and feelings, but Jesus is about to make it exceptionally concrete. He says this, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." With these words, Jesus tells his disciples what he is about to do for them. He will lay down his life for them. He will go to the cross for them. This is John chapter 3, verse 16 and verse 17 fleshed out. John 3:16 begins, "For God so loved the world that he gave his son." Well, God didn't just give his son to the world by sending him to the world. God gave his son to the world by having his son die for the sake of the world. As John 3:17 says, "Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." Jesus is about to save the world at the cost of his life. He's about to lay down his life for his friends and for their salvation. And the disciples may not comprehend or understand this, but this is what he is about to do. Such self-sacrifice is the hallmark of true friends. Friends make sacrifices for one another. They do things for one another. They go out of their way for one another. And on occasion, friends might make the ultimate sacrifice for one another. And some of you may know stories about such acts of self-sacrifice. They are powerful and moving. But Jesus then says something else. He's about to change his relationship with his disciples. He has told them what friends do. Now he says this, "You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants anymore, because the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends." Jesus tells his disciples that they are no longer his disciples. The Greek word for disciple means student, and he's no longer their rabbi, and the Hebrew word for rabbi means teacher. They no longer have a teacher-student relationship. That's gone. They are now friends, and things are different between them. One of my favorite professors at Wartburg Seminary was Dr. Frank Benz. Dr. Benz taught Old Testament and Hebrew. I loved taking classes from him. He was personable, friendly, loved what he taught, and he showed his students that he really cared for them. He was everything a teacher, a professor, and a mentor should be. My senior year, just before I graduated, in a Hebrew class I was taking from him, I said, "Dr. Benz," and he stopped me and he said, "Call me Frank." Now, I must have had a puzzled expression on my face because I was brought up in a good German household where you respect relationships and the formality of titles, and his words confused me. But he continued. "Call me Frank," he said. "You are about to graduate from seminary. You are no longer my student. You are my colleague." And with that, he changed our relationship. That's what Jesus did with his disciples. They were no longer his disciples, his followers. They were now his friends. And friends treat one another differently. They see one another differently. Jesus lays out this difference to them when he says, "The servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends because I have made everything known to you that I have heard from my Father." When someone is your friend, your true friend, you are open and honest with each other. You confide in one another. My best friend Rick and I, we've been best friends for over 40 years. We have shared things with each other that we probably have not even shared with our wives. Such is friendship. Jesus will now let his friends know what his Father's will is. This will comprise much of what he has said that he still has to share with them that night. Friends also have expectations of each other. You can ask a friend to do something and expect that he or she will do it. "You did not choose me, but I chose you," Jesus said to them, talking about how their relationship began. "And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last." Jesus has long-term expectations of his friends, expectations which will continue after he has left them, expectations that they will bear fruit because he has chosen them as his friends. And friends can do that. Jesus ties their friendship into his relationship with his heavenly Father too. He says, "So that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name." Jesus' heavenly Father is also their heavenly Father. Jesus has brought them into his relationship with God. And then he sums it up all one more time. "I am giving you these commandments so that you may love one another." His commandment is not only that they are to love one another, his commandment will enable them to love one another. It will be the tie that binds them together during the difficult hours and days they were about to face, and it would tie them and bind them together for the rest of their lives as they serve to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. So thanks for joining me for this week's gospel, and I will tie a lot of this into my sermon, which you'll hear this weekend. God's blessings to you.